I try to never be a rage bait channel, but if something really irritates me, especially in the world of comic books, video games, movies, etc., I talk about it. This is a channel that is based around variety, and in some ways, I guess I use it just to highlight the things I care about, positive or negative. And there was something around Superman that really annoyed me. I try not to let fiction bother me too much. I mean, it's fake, right? But these characters matter to a lot of people. They're very important to people. They are, in a lot of ways, modern mythology. They are characters we look up to, and I don't want to say base our morals off of, but I think that they're good in a lot of ways because they make us better people. They make us strive to be better. And recently, in an issue from DC Comics, it was pretty much insinuated that Superman should have stopped COVID-19. I'm going to get into this here because if I just left it there, the media literacy of this video would be zero, because I understand that's not entirely what's being said here. It's supposed to be like this societal critique. It's supposed to be this deep point. I understand what they're trying to do. I went to school for writing. I get it. But this is an example of trying to be really deep and trying to involve real world ideas and real world events into your story in a way that's extremely ham-fisted and honestly ridiculous. It's just very over the top. This is in Jenny Sparks, issue number 6. Now, some of you are going to say, who's Jenny Sparks? I don't know who that is. This is actually a character from quite a ways back, actually in the late 90s or mid 90s, I would say, that got rolled into DC Comics with, the Authority and things like that. And actually in the past, I would say was written pretty well. This was in her comic book, which was written by Tom King. That's important because we're going to get into that. Who you might remember from Batman, but you might also remember from some very, very dumb comments and lashing out over the years. So it makes sense Tom King would write something like this. So we're going to hop into this for a few minutes. This is very funny. I would expect something like this out of a modern Spider-Man comic from Marvel, like very over the top, like Peter maybe being lectured in the bedroom by Paul while Paul is, doing stuff with MJ. Maybe like Paul would lecture Peter about how he should have used his great responsibility to stop the bubonic plague or something. That's what I would have expected, but it's very interesting to see it in DC Comics with Superman. So, oh boy, I do have a question of the day for you, which is, what is the most over-the-top, ridiculous writing you've seen in a comic book? I'm very interested. It can be politically related, it can be related to real-world stuff, or it could be just really bad, over-the-top writing, tackling even a basic premise. I'm interested in that. Let me know. Now, in Jenny Sparks issue 6, which is taking more of a look at this character at different points in time, especially in recent years, they got into the whole mask debate from the pandemic from that time, which I'm not going to try and say the name of the sickness too many times because I publish these videos also on YouTube, among other places, and on YouTube they're very censorship-y, or have been in the past, with the name of that sickness, where they'll flag your channel and stuff. I don't know why, but they've really been over the top with it. Now, regardless, she was essentially confronting Superman about this and yelling at him when he was hovering in the air near a rooftop, and she was standing on a rooftop wearing a mask, and she's essentially screaming and swearing at him, saying, for F's sake, when are you going to fix this? Pointing at the mask, and Superman says, it's a virus, I can't punch it, and then she says, you could, and then swears again, and it's censored, so who knows what she says. Then starts swearing again and again, saying, I can't breathe, I can't talk, screw this thing, essentially. And then basically just saying a bunch of FUs to Superman while he's just sitting here, kind of like, what the hell is this person's problem? So then it moves on from here, if you thought it just didn't get to be enough, where essentially Superman asks, are you finished? And she starts swearing again. He says, I'm not threatened by sickness, and I doubt you are, but the doctors aren't sure if I can carry it. Maybe someday I'm helping an elderly woman fetch her cat out of a tree. If I were to make her ill... And then she says, no, I'm not effing finished. Thank you for asking, and knocks the mask away from him. And then she goes on and on about how I'm tired of this. We're superheroes and the world is dying, and all I'm doing is sitting at effing home staring at my bloody phone. And then Superman said, that's funny. I never thought of you as a superhero. To which she says, yeah, and I never thought of you as someone who couldn't protect the effing world. He says, yes, you did. Then hands her the mask and she says, bloody hell, Give me the effing thing, you big blue bastard. I am more forgiving of covering real world events than I know a lot of you are in the comments section of wherever I'm posting this. I know a lot of people will say, I want no politics in my stories. I want no real world whatever. This is fiction. I understand what people are trying to say when they say that. Like, what they're really trying to say is they don't want over the top bullshit like this, right? But I do think that when people put their foot down on an extreme level, they actually are missing out on a lot of good stories. Like, there are a lot of moral conundrum stories. There are a lot of stories that get into political intrigue and ideas. I always bring up Metal Gear Solid. I always bring up some classic comic books. Watchmen is extremely political. It's something that lands with people on both sides of the aisle, no matter where you are. I'm just talking about America on that one. I know other places have their own politics. Classic Star Trek The Next Generation. These are things mired in moral ideas, political intrigue, questions of what's right and what's wrong in the sense of putting your own morals and ideas off on someone else. Like, they're very relativist, but also they don't shove it down your throat. Like, when they're well written, they ask questions, they point out issues, and they ask you questions. And they don't paint one thing specifically always as like the right absolute choice, and the other thing as the dumb one, and you're a traitor if you pick that. But the thing with this is, this event in particular, no matter where you are, I feel like most people feel like it was mishandled. Whatever you think about the masks, whatever you think about this illness, I'm going to be honest, doesn't really matter in the sense of what we're talking about. Like, you can share that and that's fine. But for me, that's not really what this is about. What this is about is that this event specifically was mishandled by a lot of parts of the world. It killed so many businesses that were unable to continue existing, while huge mega corporations were allowed to keep functioning, and they didn't go out of business. And so this event killed so many different people, both physically, but also monetarily. Like, people never recovered from this. And during this whole thing, there were all these people preaching and parroting these things that they were being told, whether it be by the government or by other people, whether it be truth or not, that's up to you. But they were repeating all of these different things. And in comics, they were even putting these preachy panels like, be a hero, wear a mask. And it was just so over the top and ridiculous. And it didn't feel respectful. It felt like it was talking down to people, like, basically, shut the fuck up, consume, do what we tell you, and that's it. It didn't really feel like it was actually saying anything. The same way that this comic doesn't feel like it's saying anything. And actually, by the way, somebody on Twitter, a friend of the channel who has watched for a long time and commented on a lot of stuff, Darth Phazon actually pointed out that if you really want to get into this, Superman also has super advanced Kryptonian technology at the Fortress of Solitude, light years ahead of the world. Doesn't mean he could cure every illness in every person, but like, if you really wanted to get into this, you don't even really tackle that idea, which is kind of odd. I guess I just don't really understand what they're going for here. Like, what's the message? And what's frustrating to me is the message is something that that's the reason I think this is bad. You're just prioritizing the message, and this dialogue is absolute dog water. Like, it's buns. It's terrible. It's horrible. And when looking into this, because I wanted to see who actually wrote this issue, it was Tom King. And you might know Tom King from the past. You might know him from things like working on Batman. He did some good work on Batman. He did some bad. I thought he wrote Batcat very well as a couple. But overall, he's this guy who is always bringing up that he worked for the CIA, but he's also always morally posturing, which is weird because the CIA is the last people you'd expect to morally posture. If you look at some of the things they have felt compelled to do, both in the United States and in other nations, it's weird that this guy is always morally posturing, both in his writing and online on social media, while having been part of that group. I'm not saying everybody in the CIA is bad, but I would think if you're such a moral paragon, you wouldn't have wanted to be part of that anyway. But that said, it does make sense to me that he would go on this big rant in the comic that really doesn't say anything at all, because he also is this guy who, while morally posturing, pretty much attacked, slandered in a lot of ways, in my opinion at least, defamed in a lot of ways, and brought a lot of negative attention to fellow comic book worker and artist Jay Lee. I actually never talked about this on the channel. It annoyed me when it happened, but essentially, if you know what Comicsgate is, and it's up to you what you define this as, I think there are a lot of people who are critical of comic book writing, like I am, who people would just call Comicsgate for not eating everything up. There's also a lot of people who are genuinely just dicks, who hate anything that is not the exact way they want it, who other people would classify under that category. It's hard to actually identify. You know, it's not like we're talking about the Ku Klux Klan here. We're talking about people who get lumped under this umbrella. Some of them are just critical of modern comics writing. They feel like it's forced, like what I'm talking about. They feel like it's prioritizing the message over good writing. Some of them think there can be no message. I don't think that. Comicsgate is seen as this hate group. It's like, oh, you didn't like this thing. You're part of Comicsgate. And you kind of get ostracized from whatever that community is. I've seen a lot of people be accused of that who don't have anything to do with it, which is what Tom King did to Jay Lee, the comic book artist who's pretty famed, especially for his covers, during the weekend when Jay Lee was mourning the death of his dog. Like, his dog had just died. This poor dude felt sad. He wasn't on Twitter, like, all over the place. He wasn't, on the internet reading all of this stuff, digging into, like, who is this group? What is this group? Who's part of what? Tom King is just obsessed with this identity stuff. He's always looking into these things, like, who said what? How can I label this person? And because of that, it's very ironic to see that moral posturing coming from someone who is a part of the CIA, a group that has killed a lot of people and been implicated in drug trafficking and deviancy throughout the world. And while looking into this, some other things came to light that I was kind of finding interesting. I'm not trying to say that you can't ever make mistakes or be involved in a war or even do something bad in a war and still grow from it and still become a better person, still have morals and values that you want to share with the world. That's not what I'm trying to say. But my problem with King is that his writing is often focused around what he wants to say, especially in this case. I hear airplanes outside. It's like they're coming to get me from the CIA. They're often focused around what he wants to say. In this case, I think it's a jumbled mess, and not how he wants to say it. Like, his message is most important for him. I don't even really know what message he was trying to get at in this comic, but I think it's just very poorly written. Can you ever mention this event? Sure, you probably can. There's probably a good way to do it. Unfortunately, there were a few years here where it felt like a lot of stories were just Trump this, Trump that, and pandemic this, pandemic that. So I think it's very hard to actually tackle topics like that and not do a poor job of it. But I think one of my big issues with King, other than prioritizing his message, is that he sits on this pedestal where when he's telling you this message and when he's throwing around these accusations of who is part of Comicsgate, who's part of this hate group, who is not, and either on purpose or inadvertently sending harassment to people like Jay Lee, he also was literally part of the team, at least according to the internet, who was responsible for the 2003 invasion of Iraq. I mean, how many civilians died in this conflict? How many people who had nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, nothing to do with terrorism, nothing to do with any of it, died in Iraq? How many U.S. soldiers died in Iraq? How many members of the CIA who maybe wanted to go home to their family could have died there, right? Now, if he hadn't done it, I'm sure somebody else would have. If he said no, then somebody else probably would have helped with that planning on that team, right? This is just from my research on the internet, the whole being part of that team and quotes from him, which I can link, I can link sources in the description down below. My point isn't that, he couldn't have done maybe something bad here, that the Iraq invasion couldn't be bad, and that then he wouldn't be able to grow as a person and change. My issue is that I don't think he has. Like, he did these things as part of this agency. Then he went on later in life, years later. We're not talking about 1 year later. We're not talking about 5 years later. We're talking many years later to accuse people like Jay Lee of being part of a hate group, as he described it. And so you've got this guy who I really don't think is a good person, but believes that he is, which is a very dangerous type of person, someone who believes they're a good person but isn't, who is pandering, preaching, and kind of talking down at you from a pulpit using comic books and using this medium that I think it's not sacred. There's a lot of absolute dog water comics that are terrible, but it's a medium that matters to people. It's a medium that has all of these characters that mean so much to people. And you have somebody who did bad in the past, in my opinion, and is continuing to do bad now publicly, yet who is not changing, but wants to grandstand and push off their values on other people through their writing. And I don't blame people for not knowing about that. I know you can separate art from the artist, but the problem is when the artist is not separating themselves in any capacity from the art, it does become hard to do that. Like, you can have a movie from Bryan Singer, like an X-Men movie, and it can have nothing to do with the supposed wrongdoings that he did. I don't know if that was ever proven or not. I have no idea. But let's just even say hypothetically it was proven. Okay, well, if that media has nothing to do with that subject matter, it's just about Wolverine going back in time to help the X-Men, it's a little easier to separate the art and the artist on that piece than it is when you have someone whose whole identity is, I was in the CIA and I did this stuff, now I'm going to tell you how to live. That's what pisses me off about this, is it just feels very two-faced. So anyways, that's kind of my point. If pointing that out makes you comic skate or whatever, that really defaces the idea of what a hate group is, right? These people don't deserve rights because they're different than me. That's a hate group mentality. Criticizing a comic book is not a hate group mentality. And Jay Lee got lumped into that essentially during this time when he was spending time with his family and grieving by Tom King. And later on, it turned out none of it was true anyway. And Tom King had to retract his statements and crawl under a rock on social media after he had basically made it so that people ripped this guy apart who had nothing to do with it. And my long story short is the fact that this terrible posturing writing came from that person is no surprise, but I'm very tired of seeing the imagery of characters that I look up to and care about evoked for someone's personal gain, benefit, and ability to stand at a pulpit and basically yell at all of us and call us stupid. That's what this feels like to me. It's just very obnoxious. I hate this stuff so much, man. Like, you want to talk about politics? Like, go look at Metal Gear Solid. Is it convoluted and ridiculous? Sure, but it doesn't feel disrespectful about its discussion of politics. It takes things... It feels like Kojima cared. And I don't get that out of stuff like this. I just get obnoxious little prick whining and screaming into the void. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Speaking of comic books, if you enjoyed this video, we have our own store, cosmobunny.shop, where we actually take existing paper. So these are from comics, manga, magazines, and more that are severely damaged. They're unable to be sold by stores. Sometimes they're given away. Sometimes they're just sold dirt cheap at a discount. What we do is we take those things. Then what we do is we turn them into transformative resin pieces. So we will save some of the paper from landfills, we'll actually turn them into a transformative resin piece, and then we will recycle the rest of that paper. We don't print images, we don't, make this, recreate this stuff. What we do is we just take paper that is going to pretty much be thrown away, we turn it into something new for your home. Discount code DJAY123 for 10% off that. I appreciate you very, very much. That same code is our Fortnite code that goes to help support our channel a lot. And we love it when you use that because YouTube is not self-sufficient. It's not, this isn't something that we make our living off of. So every time you guys support our channel, whether it be through Patreon, memberships, the Fortnite code, anything, or checking out our other channels, which are in the description down below, those things help us out quite a bit. Hope you have a fantastic day. And as always, everyone, stay shway.